Hello, this is the Torg Eternity Delphi Council Debriefings, where the storm has a name. We are your hosts, Leamon, Jay, and Mark. And first, we hope you had a happy holidays. We were getting through those, so haven't had any of the Delphi Council Debriefings in a few weeks, but we are getting back, diving into Act 6 of Fires of Ra. And we do encourage you can email us with any questions or talk about your adventures that you've had either in Fires of Ra or other places. Comment and we will answer, we'll comment back, etc. at torgdcd@gmail.com. So remember, we have that email. Also, you can do comments if you're watching this on YouTube, down in the comments section, as well as other things. But we do appreciate your either watching and or listening to us, and we just are back from the break and getting into Act 6. So again, this is Fires of Ra. You can look at our previous episodes for Acts 1 through 5, and Act 6 is called The Source of the Nile. So, to just be upfront, I played through Act 6 once, and when I game mastered, this was an act that I completely cut. The group that I was playing through, we were on a time limit, and we got to getting to the end of the time limit, and I basically was able to make the thing that you're supposed to obtain from Act 6 obtainable in a separate fashion to move on to Act 7. So game mastering wise, I have not done it, but I did play through it once. And I think, Jay, you were saying that this was an act that you were not recalling too many
Not
details
specifics.
from. So there's always going to be acts that you like, acts that you don't like, acts that can be cut. The act, I think, is fine. This is something also I think you could probably do as a standalone after going through it again. But we're going to start with Scene 1. The Port of Maul. Jay, did you have anything you could remember, or things that you might have looked at that were like, oh, here's something to remember or to keep in mind, Game Masters?
So this act starts with you have just recovered all of the blueprints for the manned jet, and Dr. Frest and co. have been studying them, and they have discovered, as has anyone who's gone up against the manned jet at this point, that it is surrounded by an impenetrable aura, like a force field called the Aura of Aten, and nothing can get through it. But Dr. Frest has found some information in the blueprints that the only thing that can get through it is a smaller sister ship made of the same materials as the man jet back where it was created. So the whole idea is we've got to head down to Uganda and find the location where the man jet was built and get this sister ship, the Evening Falcon, and basically use that as a way to actually get access to the manned jet. So as Leamon was saying, I do think this is one of the more skippable acts if you're pressed for time. Also, I think it's an act that could alternatively be really buffed up and have more added to it. Mm-hmm. This scene 1 especially seems to really feel like there's supposed to be a lot going on, but not too much really does. And it kind of has more potential, I think, to be like a future base of operations. So I could see this actually being an interesting place to sort of headquarter a campaign after Fires of Ra, mm-hmm. for reasons that might be more obvious later. But the idea here is that the characters arrive in Uganda to Kampala, and it goes through great many ways you could get there. My group got flown there by Plafty or whatever the one with a plane was. And it goes through a whole bunch of neat sites you can see in the city, things you can encounter, which aren't necessarily part of the adventure. So it really depends on your group if any of this is even going to come up. But the first thing that happens is while the characters are there, there's a prison break uh, being orchestrated by the Snake King. And the characters have to decide, are they going to, you know, go after these villains, and you make it clear that these are villains that are escaping, right? Or not. And my group decided that they thought that this would make a good distraction and keep all of the Nile forces busy. So they did absolutely nothing to try to get these prisoners back in. They never faced the Snake King. The Snake King got away, so he's running around out there with his snake arms. But they never even encountered him. So that scene one didn't really have too much aside from some sightseeing for my group.
Mark, your thoughts on scene one, Port of Mall?
So this is, it's kind of, I agree with Jay in that that scene one's kind of, and you in that scene one's kind of like, there ought to be a lot more good. It feels like there should be more there. But what you've got is kind of a map of the places that you can go in Port Bell, which is where you end up in Uganda. And there are all these locations that you can go hit, and how you get there. I think the group that you were in took a train, or maybe a boat. I don't remember. I think it might have been a boat. I don't have a note on that one. But the first scene one is really just about orienting to the area, and for us, or for when I ran it, there was some encounters around the port, because it didn't make too much sense. You come in on the ship at the dock, and now everybody knows where the strangers came from, and a whole bunch of stuff's going to happen. But there is, the prison break. I think if I remember correctly, you guys went into, where's my notes? You guys went into, there we go. Went into town, or into the port area of Port Bell, and kind of got cornered and hid in a tailor's shop.
Yeah.
And Luke Earp was getting measured, at which point Yaron saw the Snake King and the hardened criminals and the causing problems and riots and things in the streets. And you're like, well, we're heroes and those are villains. Well, we kind of have to go do something about that, which kind of drew you out into the fight that was set up there. There is a lot. Yeah, I think if a GM could figure out how to get the Evening Falcon into the hands of the Storm Knights without going through Act 6, it's imminently cuttable. There's not a lot in the act other than getting the Falcon. That's the whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
We got to end up with the Falcon, because it's either an homage or a badly stolen plot point of, we've stolen the plans to the I'm not okay. So
the manned jet,
the manned jet, not a heavenly body that brings death. And so now we found the one weakness that it has, and the Evening Falcon, which, I mean, if you don't see the parallels there, I can't help you with that. I'm not gonna throw us out there to get. I mean, any publicity is good publicity, right? Even a cease and desist. But anyway, if you can get the Evening Falcon in the hands of the Storm Knights, I don't know what else you need to do in this act. And so if you can find a way to do that without doing everything in this act, then you can. But there's some fun stuff in this act.
Oh yeah, I'll cut in to say I completely agree with Jay. This could be like expanded on, as its own, if you can get the Evening Falcon into the hands of the Storm Knight by cutting this act, you can then use this act and beef it up and have it be something else that they need to get, for another reason. And it could just be as a, hey guys, now you have this flying base, something
or just
cool
a big
like that.
Tech-type processing center.
Right.
Well,
or
the nice
something.
the nice thing about Act 6 is that you've got enough locations detailed here, individual locations scattered all throughout the city and otherwhere, that you can, as Jay pointed out, you could make this, you could like Cairo shows up all the time for the Nile Empire as a hub of villains and heroes and Nile Empire action. This could become a change of pace, and if you connect it via train or boat or plane or however, do the Indiana Jones, here comes the plane, dot, 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 and it lands, whatever. There's enough in Act 6 to give you the bones of whatever you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you got all kinds of recurring. You can have the Snake King become the local, master criminal for the area and his thugs, and how he's constantly popping up and having problems and whatever. And this is the genesis of that. And like Jay's group, he's going to create a problem for them over there. We'll use that as a distraction. Okay, well now you got the Snake King running around, and you got to come back and deal with him eventually. We'll do that as a follow-up. Sure, there's lots of story in that if you want to sit down and write it out yourself.
Yeah. If you wanted to continue, I just wanted to interject there. Didn't mean to.
No, that's cool. I'm good.
Okay. So the scene 1 is basically doing that with the Snake King. I do remember us being in the tailor's store trying to hide to begin with, and I believe because we saved the townspeople or the tailor or whatever, we all ordered suits or something.
Yes.
or
something. They were so
we
grateful in what you did. They gifted you all suits.
Yes, so it was something like that is one of those, again, memorable things that every group is going to be a little bit different, but those are the things that you remember, are those unplanned, unexpected little things that the players get invested in. Super, we wanted the details. We wanted those suits. Had nothing to do with anything else in the entire adventure, but that's what we wanted. That was our.
You were like, we hide in the shop. Well, what shop is it? Like, oh crap, I don't know. It's a tailor. It snowballed from there. I'm like, oh great, here we go.
So those are good. So we'll move on to scene 2, which I do remember one very specific part of it that was amusing. But this is the Kings of Gonda. So Jay, your thoughts on scene 2?
So in my version of scene 2, I had Akiki as their Delphi contact. So it sounds like the way it's written that she's supposed to approach the party after they've stopped the prison break, which obviously did not happen in my group. So instead of her finding them, they were supposed to find her in my game, because she would know what's going on locally. And by the time they found her, she had new orders from the Delphi Council. And so she said that there's the hard point of the kings of the Kasubi tombs that were being potentially assaulted through a secret Pan Pacifica plot. So it's kind of funny because it's a hard point in the middle of the city, but apparently the Nile Empire just doesn't care. They're like, fine, whatever. So let it go. And I know ultimately the High Lords like them actually being there because it generates more possibilities, but it's still kind of funny that it's Pan Pacific behind it. So this elicited a half-hour argument between the players, because half of them wanted to continue with the whole, it's not our problem, it's not our mission, this works in our favor because it's going to keep things chaotic. And then the other half of the characters being like, look, we already let this go, and we can see literally on the radio there's people talking about these criminals rampaging through the city, so we can't do this again, we have to actually help. And so And then sorry, her name is Akiki Lawanga. She basically told them she's not going to tell them anything unless they help. So they eventually managed to make their way to the tombs, and so there's a like a protest, like a mob outside of the tombs because this Charsonist villain has gotten everyone all riled up against it with spreading all kinds of propaganda and everything. And so there's sort of two different things going on at the same time. You're trying to get the mob under control and deal with the Charsonist. And I don't remember the specifics, but I recall the mob got taken like care of really quick, and I think it was like a super outstanding success or something because they totally turned on the Charsonist and basically just delivered him right to the party. And like the merc basically just like outright executed him in the middle of the street, and everyone was like, damn. And so that part went the big confrontation of the scene was over very quick, which is not how it was always going to be in this act.
So, Mark, your thoughts on Kings of Gonda?
Yeah, Akiki shows up and kind of just says, "Hey, I need your help," and the help. And it was kind of similar going for us. As I recall, the mob got dealt with fairly quickly, and when the hardened criminals showed up, that ended rather rapidly. The Charsonist had his head blown off by a Barrett sniper rifle, and we got glory in this round with Crag smashing 3 hardened criminals with his axe. And I mean, it was an 87, so it was pretty impressive. And let's see. Erp rolls a 1 on his persuasion last-ditch effort, and the crowd goes into a frenzy as they witness the death of the Charsonist, and the hard point fell due to the failure of the persuasion DSR, which I very rarely have I seen DSRs fail, but it did in this one because, well, every now and then you roll a 1, and they lost the hard point. But let's see. I think they blew the persuasion, and the mob destroyed the hard point. So even though they killed off the Charsonist and the bad guys, the mob kind of took on a life of its own and did what mobs do.
Right. As a clarification, there are 2 DSRs that were going on at the same time.
Yeah.
So we kind of split the party. These people are trying to deal with this DSR. These people are trying to deal with this DSR. The one DSR, as Mark said, went very fast, very easy. The other one, we got to the last step, last round or something like that.
It was a last-ditch effort.
And the last-ditch effort came in, which we've talked about in our DSR episode, that it adds penalties. And then, since a 1 was rolled and we didn't have any second chance cards, you could not get out of that, so therefore it failed. And it is one of maybe 2 Torg Eternity DSRs that I remember failing, because normally they don't. Normally you can get through them with card play and possibilities and time, etc. This one did not go that way. And it was just one of those kind of, everybody's like, oh wow, we actually failed a DSR. It also did, and I think it was good. If you always succeeded in DSRs, there wouldn't be a point to just rolling dice. You would just explain what's going on. So the chance of failure and having it fail kind of sets up a, hey, this can happen. And when we split into 2 groups, then your pools are only working with one of the DSRs. So instead of having like 5-6 people working on one DSR, you have 3 people working on one and 3 different people working on another one. And you might have even said that, sometimes if our characters get too far away, we're like, you can only trade cards with the people in your group because they don't they're not really affecting the people in the other group.
Yeah, I typically run it that way because it makes sense to me that if the 3 are over here and the 2 or more are over here, it adds a level of complexity and a level of risk to the players when they know I've limited my pool of stuff to only what I brought with me, right? So your choices then become, well, who goes where? It becomes more important, right?
Right.
And the risk goes up. And like you said, there needs to be a value to the play. If there's not a risk involved, then every now and then, bad things happen. Because if they don't, then, like you said, let's just narrate what happens and leave the dice in the bag.
Right, and no, it was good. I mean, we failed. Don't like that.
No.
you never like failing because we did the one so good. As you even said, we got a glory 87 roll, and then on the other hand, we failed the other DSR and the hardpoint collapsed. So we had a big good moment and a big bummer moment at the same time, but it wasn't like the adventure just stopped because we failed a DSR.
Mm-hmm. It became flavor for the whole thing.
Right. So Game Masters, don't be afraid to split up into DSRs, and actually Jay and I were talking about this before we started recording, is one thing that we want to bring forward and make sure that game masters and players understand in year 2 is that you can have your DSRs a little more fluid, that you can split up and have 2 DSRs. A DSR that is 4 rounds of one person doing one skill is kind of boring. This brought in a nice thing of not only 1, 2, and then other people are still doing other things. It's not just 2 people doing the same skill. There is a lot involved, and you have 2 different DSRs going at the same time. It just can really work well, and DSR should be fluid for the game master and the story to be able to adapt and make what is most out of the plot. So even though, at the beginning we were talking about, Act 6, it can be cut and stuff. If you do use it, it's really good. There's good stuff in here. We're not saying close your eyes and don't look at it. We're just saying you can use it elsewhere, or you can expand it. There's just options that you and your table can do. Or run it. Or, we're playing Fires of Ra until Fires of Ra is done, then play Fires of Ra until Fires of Ra is done.
Is a lot. Don't get us wrong. We said you can cut this act. This act is a lot of fun. This act has a lot of good stuff in it. It's kind of like when you do, maybe I got dog hair going everywhere. I'm sorry. My husky came over and I petted him, and dog hair is just going everywhere. It's like inserting the crossing in the Cyber Papacy Mega Adventure, because you can insert one of those. This is like written in as a mission that got inserted, and it's part of the actual Mega Adventure. So run it. There's good stuff in this act.
Yeah. So I just wanted to interject and make sure that we're not saying don't use it. We're just saying you can use it in different ways that can figure, and it can be very, very fun. So let's move on to scene 3, Lukwada strikes. So Jay, your thoughts on scene 3?
So since they helped Akiki, she takes them to this old Captain Mukisa, and his ship, and they lamented that they couldn't use Rafty, but they decided to trust this guy. I think at this point I should also mention that since the Orworsh alchemist died in the previous act, he got replaced by an elven... I don't even know what he is, but he got replaced by an elf. I think he was named Valerian, who basically had a white wolf and also pretty much every leadership perk you can imagine. So he was completely useless at doing anything himself, and all he could do was get rid of debuffs on the rest of the team, essentially, which is good. I've seen a fair amount of people run those kind of characters in organized play. But the funny thing is that whenever it came time to do a leadership check or like just use an ability, he would never role play it as if it was like him being a leader. He would just say he like flipped his hair and gave them a smoldering gaze and stuff, and it just pissed off the other players so much. It was hilarious. But, so now we have an elf in the group too. So now we're here in the Nile Empire with a cyborg, an elf, an Adinos, and a crazy Australian guy. So it's quite the party. I'm shocked they made it through that diplomatic session last time. So they get into this ship, they get onto the lake, and Lake Victoria is a huge lake. I think it's supposed to be the largest lake or something like that. I can't, at least,
It's
I
massive.
I watched a YouTube video earlier today about people sailing on there. It's, whew. Anyway, but a bit different now with the Nile Empire. The Empire has forbid much traffic. There's still fishermen kind of going around, but the tourism is dead, essentially. So the idea here now is you're going to Bubeke Island, where this factory that the Manjet was made is supposed to be, and on the way you encounter a ferry filled with refugees heading away from the Nile Empire, and it gets attacked by a giant sea creature, or at least what initially appears to be a sea creature, but is in fact a robotic plesiosaur. And I have to say, this combat took forever and almost did my group in. It was brutal. Partially because one of the Retribution League is here. It's the Iron Crocodile.
Mm-hmm.
And my players, not these characters, but this group, had encountered the Iron Crocodile previously in a Delphi adventure, and they had defeated him, and I had even given them like a little like epilogue scene of him having to go before Wuhan and explain what happened, and then Wuhan threw mysterious powder in his face, and he became fused with his armor now, so basically buffed him up for the next time he would face the heroes. But he never faced those heroes again, but now he's facing these heroes. So I buffed his stats. I made him a bit stronger than he was, just to reflect what had happened in the campaign. And then you also have all these robo sea folk and Luquata, the giant beast itself, and Wundermind, who is essentially just a brain in a brain case in a robot body, like the classic. And I thought the players were going to think he was super cool, but they were all very blasé about it. And I think that's because there was just a ape brain in a jar in the previous act.
Right.
So you can't do that too many times in a row. So the fight was very hard. They took a lot of damage. People almost died. It might be because the new elf wasn't all that useful, but I don't remember how it happened, because I don't think any of the characters had it as a latent ability. They might have had an item or something. But I remember the question came up with Wundermind is, well, he's a brain, right? So he's still a person. We can mind control him, right? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. So they just mind controlled him to detach and jump in the lake, and he sank to the bottom, and got him out of the fight. But he came back later in a later scene. But it was a tough fight. They did defeat the Iron Crocodile. There was an obstacle, and they have a whole bunch of options for different things that can happen, and I had one of the other Retribution League members show up as well. I can't remember her name now. It's the cockroach lady.
Cicada.
Yeah, Cicada. That's who it was. Yeah, had her show up as well. Yeah. Well, I only used her for this one scene. She's not even in the adventure unless you optionally bring her in. So I brought her in, so she was like in the air. So it got very chaotic, but they eventually won and saved all of the refugees on the ship. Although half of them had to unload onto the Bahati, but they eventually got themselves dropped off on the island while everyone else went off. And that leads basically to scene 4. But keep in mind that Wundermind was still alive at this point, just slowly walking back to the island on the bottom of the lake.
So, Mark, your thoughts on Scene 3, Lukwata Strikes?
This was kind of telegraphed. Everybody saw this kind of coming, especially when they got the boat with the refugees. It's like, oh, we have innocent victims in harm's way now. As soon as the combat starts, check. Combat starts soon, and then Laquata shows up with Wundermine, and I remember from our combat the Robo Sea Folk exploding being very dramatic and like, oh crap, and that was doing lots of damage, and it was that
Maybe that's what it
aspect
was.
of the Robo Sea Folk was from my point of view, it was super cool because it threw a wrinkle into combat that everybody hadn't thought of. Whereas Crag, who's our dwarf swinging the axe, would just wade into the combat and just start cutting people down like a scythe through wheat. Now he's got to take 3 explosions from these guys if he, knocks 3 of them out. And he could, but it was dice can always explode, and they do occasionally. We had the ever-present Law Rocket show up to deal with Luquata and Wundermind, which is always helpful. But they did manage to get some of the refugees into Luquata, and Iron Crocodile, he escaped. He got a couple wounds, and then he slinked off. And Wundermind, he also got away with a bunch of wounds, and Laquata got away with a bunch of wounds. So everybody escaped in traditional Nile Empire fashion from this combat. But that's not really an escape because everything was damaged and wounded, which made it easy to figure out where they were going. So the boat just had to follow the oil trail of Laquata taking off, right, to get to the island, which they were going there anyway. But here's a nice explanation for why you get to find it easily. I really liked this combat. It was when the Robo Sea Folk started exploding, there was a wait a minute, how do we deal with this? And now that the wrinkle got put in there where, okay, I can't just shoot them with my Barrett. I have to make sure nobody's in the melee combat with them when I shoot them, or how many are they around the refugees, or what's going to happen? And we started blowing up boats, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun because it was something that they hadn't seen before. I did not put someone else from the Retribution League in here, and they didn't have any history, I don't think. Maybe somebody is Iron Crocodile in what's that Mississippi adventure?
He was it was at a dock.
Yeah, it was the Shrouded in the Fog one.
One of the
yeah, there may have been some of you guys that had met him before, but it didn't play as heavily into this encounter as it did for your group, Jay. But it was a good encounter. It was a good fight. It was kind of expected, but hey, yeah, we ran through it and did our. I ended up running. I think what happened at some point was the Bahi caught fire and was sinking, and I scrambled up a DSR on the fly to keep the ferry from sinking, so that all of the people could get off, because we had problems from the exploding sea folk. Leamon, you may remember that differently.
I just remember the sea folk being, and looking at their stats, they're not like super duper, but they're definitely better than a Nile Shock Trooper. And just that difference made it a more intense fight than a normal, if you're just fighting Nile Empire Shock Troopers. So I remember it that. I could be wrong,
fear.
but I thought that they were also trying to grab some refugees, or maybe they were attacking refugees.
They were
grabbing them, trying to. So we did kind of have to split up fighting them versus saving them, or rescuing them, them exploding, taking down the boat, and other things. I just remember it being a very intense combat, more so than what you would normally figure that's not a dramatic scene at the end of the act, which is good. You don't always have to have the big stuff only at the end. Mixing it up, bringing surprise and stuff can add to the game. And as Jay pointed out, you have the brain in a jar on the robot body. Very classic sci-fi. Getting brought into the Nile Empire appropriately. So we'll go ahead and we'll move to scene 4, Showdown at...
Ooh, before you do,
Yep.
There were in the stiff resistance section. There's obstacles, and that's why I had a DSR, because I threw the sinking ferry obstacle in there. There's other things you can, if your team's having, and this is where Jay got, I think.
Retribution League.
Cicada, because the retribution. Yeah. There's other things you can do here to make it more interesting. If you're like, another fight on the water, okay, throw some other stuff in there, and we picked some other stuff to do, and it made it more interesting.
And be prepared. You can use the other ones in other games. You have,
absolutely.
Just because Jay chose to do Retribution League and have the Grand Cicada come, that doesn't mean he couldn't use any of the other ones in some other mission.
Yeah.
So having choices is always good, because even if you don't use a choice now, you can use it in the future. So do remember that there are some cool ways to change up your typical water fight.
Yep.
So we'll move on to scene 4, Showdown at Bubeki.
So it talks a lot about stealth for this scene. My players decided to finally opt for no stealth. They were like, we're not even going to pretend anymore, due to the insane toughness on the cyborg and the extreme amount of damage that the Core Earth soldier could put out, because we were still doing multi-targeting with blast weapons. So his grenade launcher was ridiculous. They decided to do a full frontal assault on the island, and it pretty much worked. They were mowing down shock troopers by the dozens every round. They pretty much, I think, one packet fighter got off the runway. The others were destroyed before they could clear. And the cyborg had a bomb literally dropped right on top of her and was fine. So they just went through like a monsters. And, sometimes as a GM, you just got to let them do it. Like, let them feel like ridiculously overpowered heroes that they are. They just tromped through it, and they got inside, they got to the lab, and they were doing the research when Wundermind returned, covered in seaweed coming up out of the lake. But they just beat the hell out of him, and they were freaked out when his brain started crawling away on its own. That was probably like the most memorable part of it for some of the players. That were like, they just wouldn't shut up about it after a while. Like, that's disgusting, and they just basically went and stomped it. So I mean, they got rid of him. I was like, what if he's an Eris agent? No. Yeah. So they just went through, and it was like a Rambo 3 kind of situation. They just laid waste to the place, which I suppose in some ways can also just be kind of cathartic.
Mm-hmm. Mark, your thoughts on scene 4, Showdown at Bubeki?
So the Bubeki Island got a little more complicated for my group, because Laquata and Wundermind escaped, and so did Iron Crocodile, and so they're here. And they came up to the beach, and they decided to sneak onto the island. So they snooped and pooped up to the fence and got over the wall, and they're creeping along, and had to deal with the sea folk that escaped, and Laquata and Wundermind. But pretty much they did a really good job of planning their approaches. The dice were favorable, and they got into the into the compound and onto the factory floor without triggering all the guards. So they didn't have to fight their way through everybody, which they kind of looked at it and said, well, there's just too many. We don't want to deal with all of that, and decided to go the stealthy route, which worked out for them. And they encountered the death trap with Colonel Cairo, and in the process of releasing Colonel Cairo, decided that they were going to escape on the Evening Falcon. At which point things got more interesting, and we went to scene 5.
Yeah, I don't have much to say or remember. I want to say, I don't remember if it was this scene or the next scene, that there were the Pacat fighters that we figured if we jumped into the Evening Falcon that they would follow us, and we tried to...
Yeah, you sabotaged a bunch of them.
Sabotage them to
Yep.
keep them. But so we did try. We actually went with the trying to be sneaky and thoughtful during it. So this does lead to scene 5, the factory. So Jay, if you want to talk about scene 5, the factory.
I don't know why this is a scene, to be honest. It's really just one of the buildings in the island, and it doesn't have any particular encounter or anything, just a difficulty to open the hangar door. So I personally did not treat it as a separate scene. I just treated it as scene 4. I did, when you mentioned Colonel Cairo, for the life of me, I cannot remember what happened to Colonel Cairo in mine, but I do remember that I basically made him talk like the Tick the whole time. It's like, that's right, chums! You know, that sort of stuff. But I don't remember if they even tried to help him or if they succeeded or not. It's the one thing about this act that's been completely escaping me. But yeah, so they get into the factory, they find the Evening Falcon, they get in, they flew away, no problems. There was only one packet in the air, and as it even mentions in the adventure, escaping it is ludicrously simple, so just to the speed difference. So they shot out, and it was overall quite a success. Yeah, it was just an action-packed ending where they got to vent some frustrations and take off.
Mark, your thoughts on scene 5, the factory?
Yeah, so I did it a little differently. I broke the escape into kind of 2 parts, where we had the escape. We had the escape from the factory and the escape in the Falcon, and once in the air, there was kind of a DSR or a chase to get away, because it just I don't like the idea of just, okay, we floor it and we're gone, done, and the pockets are just like, because that's not really, I mean,
It's
just not.
It's real world logic
I have a rebuttal.
versus cinematic logic.
I mean, when you're in a spaceship and you just go light speed, poop, and we're out, done. Okay, shoot, yeah. But this is an aircraft that's got to get up, to altitude and speed and all. So I kind of ran it as a chase to, you got to maneuver and get away from the pockets, and if you can do that, you're taking shots from the fighters as they're trying to cripple you before you can get away, and you're trying to get away and shoot them down and whatnot. And so I kind of ran it as a 2-parter: get out of the factory and take off, and then once you're airborne, you got to avoid the fighters. And there weren't that many, because you guys did a great job in disabling them, but I think I had 2 that got off the ground that you ended up, because otherwise, if there weren't something in the air, then it was just like, okay, we don't do anything with this. So yeah, I ran it a little differently.
You had a rebuttal, Jay?
Oh, well, it's a 2-part, I guess. One is, I have been through so many of these being chased by a few packet fighter chase scenes in the Nile Empire. I'm sick of it. I don't want to do it anymore. But the actual serious one is that scene 1 of the next act is right into a dogfight as well.
Yep.
So I didn't also want it to be like we end with a dogfight and start with a dogfight.
Well, and I thought about that, but
Yeah.
the point I thought it was, I thought, okay, they've got this cool plane, and that it can do all this stuff, and they detail, this is what the
True,
Evening
yeah.
Falcon has.
They do give you a
It,
lot of stats you barely ever use.
yeah, and I was like, it sucks that you don't get to use it. And they had people that were like, okay, I want to do this and I want to do that, and I got a pilot, and we got a guy on the guns, and all this other stuff, and I'm like, let's let them have fun with the toy that they've stolen. And so I ran the first one with the chase, which gives you plenty of time with two fighters swooping in and out and everything to deal with them as because you got the pilot who has to do the chase step,
Mhm.
and then everybody helps him. How are you helping the pilot? Oh, I'm shooting a gun. Okay, well, you're shooting a gun, whatever. That's helping the pilot. How are you helping the pilot? I'm navigating. And so we had a navigator who was trying to help. And I think we had an engineer who was working I think Yarn was working the engineering station to try and help the engines go fast or something like that. And it gave everybody the opportunity to do stuff, and it was cool because they got this plane they stole. And I thought it would be a waste of a really good game asset to not use it at least once more.
So I would just agree with both of you in that scene 5 as written is very short. It's just get to the Evening Falcon and escape. And either incorporating it into scene 4 as a quick escape. Once you get there, you escape, or expanding it into having the escape actually be something would be the way that I would encourage game masters to think about as those two choices. Either expand C5 a little bit or wrap it into scene 4 and then make that part of the factory and stuff, because scene 5 is the dramatic scene, to make scene 4 the a little more dramatic in that. So that is the end of Act 6. The players have the Evening Falcon, and they have the plans of the manned jet, and then we will get to Act 7, the culmination of the Fires of Ra. So,
Dum dum dum.
having said that, I want to thank everybody again for either listening or watching this episode. Stay tuned. We'll get into more cyberware stuff. We'll get into Act 7 of Fires of Ra. And we have many, many episodes in the future coming. Again, you can email us at torgdcd@gmail.com. And until next time, we hope you have fun in your own Cosmverse. Bye.